My wife's birthday party planner called. I've sent your wife's guest list to your email. When I opened it, I saw my wife's ex-husband's name and her ex-lover, who destroy my life. I said, cancel the entire birthday party. She gasped, but sir, you're not the celebrant dash. No, but I own the venue, the catering company, and the hotel chain she booked for guests. You know what they say about Tuesdays? They're the forgotten middle child of the work week. Nobody gets excited about Tuesday. It's not Monday with all that fresh start energy, and it sure as hell isn't Friday with the weekend dangling like a carrot. Tuesday just exists, doing its job without any fanfare. Kind of like me, I guess. My name is Rowan Ellison, and I'm 38 years old. Most people would probably describe me as successful, though I've never been one to throw that word around lightly. Success is subjective, right? But if we're talking numbers, then yeah, I've done all right for myself. I'm the CEO of Ellison Group, and before you start picturing some trust fund kid who inherited daddy's empire, let me set the record straight. I built this hospitality business from absolutely nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean I started with a beat-up taco truck that had more rust than paint and a dream that most people would have called delusional. That was 15 years ago. Now I've got hotels, restaurants, catering companies, and event venues scattered across the Pacific Northwest. But here's the thing about wealth, real wealth. It doesn't need to announce itself. I don't drive around in flashy cars or wear watches that cost more than most people's annual salary. I let others make their assumptions about who I am and what I'm worth. It's amazing how much you can learn about people when they underestimate you. This particular Tuesday morning started like any other. I was in my office on the 42nd floor of a Seattle high-rise, the kind of building where the elevator ride gives you enough time to review your entire life's choices. The view from up here is something else. You can see Elliott Bay stretching out like a gray-blue canvas, with the Olympic Mountains playing backdrop to the whole scene. On clear days, which are rarer than you'd think in Seattle, Mount Rainier shows up like it's posing for a postcard. I had my usual black coffee in hand. None of that fancy stuff with 17 syllables in its name, and I was doing what I do every morning, scanning reports. Revenue from the Portland location, occupancy rates at the Bellevue Hotel, customer satisfaction scores from the catering division. Numbers tell stories, and I've always been good at reading between the lines. The breakfast crowd at our downtown restaurant was up 12% from last month. The corporate retreat bookings were looking solid for the fall. Everything was running like a well-oiled machine, which is exactly how I like it. That's when my assistant, Patricia, buzzed me through the intercom. Patricia's been with me for about 6 years now, and she's got this way of managing my schedule that borders on psychic. She knows when I need to take calls and when I need to be left alone to think. She's probably in her 50s, efficient as hell, and has never once asked me for anything unreasonable. Good people are hard to find in this business. Mr. Ellison, her voice came through the speaker with that professional tone she uses when she's not sure how I'm going to react to something. I have someone online too, a party planner named Melody. She says it's about Mrs. Ellison's birthday celebration. I looked up from my laptop screen and raised an eyebrow. Alana's birthday. Right. Her 40th was coming up in a couple of weeks, and she'd been dropping hints about wanting something special. Not hints, actually. She'd been pretty direct about it. She wanted a big party, something memorable, with all the bells and whistles. The kind of event that gets talked about for months afterward. Now, I'm not the type of guy who makes a big deal about birthdays, but Alana is different. She loves celebrations, loves being the center of attention, loves having reasons to get dressed up and show off. And honestly, I don't mind indulging her. She's been through a lot over the years, and if throwing her a party makes her happy, then that's what we'll do. So yeah, I'd already taken care of everything. Quietly, behind the scenes, the way I prefer to handle things. I'd reached out to some connections, secured a venue, arranged for catering, the whole 9 yards. I wasn't looking for credit or recognition. I just wanted to make sure my wife had the birthday she'd been dreaming about. That's what husbands do, right? We take care of the people we love, even if they don't always notice the effort that goes into it. Put her through, I told Patricia, leaning back in my leather chair and taking another sip of coffee. I figured this would be a quick call, probably just some minor detail that needed approval, or maybe a question about dietary restrictions for the guests. Standard party planning stuff. I pressed the button to take the call and settled in. expecting nothing more complicated than a discussion about flower arrangements or menu options. Just another Tuesday morning conversation in what I thought was going to be just another business day. Sometimes life has a way of laughing at your expectations. The voice that came through my phone was sweet as honey, with just a hint of southern charm that made you want to trust her immediately. Melody sounded like the kind of person who probably grew up saying, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir," and actually meant it. Professional, but warm. The kind of party planner who remembers your anniversary and sends you a handwritten note afterward. "Mr. Ellison, thank you so much for taking my call," she said, and I could practically hear her smile through the phone. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I know you're a busy man." "No problem at all, Melody," I replied, minimizing the spreadsheet I'd been reviewing. "What can I do for you?" "Well, I just wanted to touch base about Mrs. Ellison's birthday celebration. Everything is moving along beautifully, by the way. The florals are going to be absolutely stunning. And the menu. Oh my goodness. Your wife has exquisite taste. I think this is going to be one of those parties people talk about for years." I found myself nodding even though she couldn't see me. That was Alana, all right. She did have incredible taste, I'll give her that. Whether it was picking out art for our house or choosing a restaurant for dinner, she had this instinct for quality that I'd always admired. It's one of the things that drew me to her in the first place. That confidence in knowing what she wanted and going after it. "I'm glad to hear everything's on track," I said, already reaching for my coffee cup. "What do you need from me?" "Oh, just a small thing really. I've put together the final guest list based on all of Mrs. Ellison's requests, and I wanted to run it by you before we send out the final confirmations. I know you like to stay on top of the details, and honestly, it's refreshing to work with someone who cares so much about making their spouse happy." I almost laughed at that. If she only knew how many surprise parties, anniversary dinners, and random Tuesday night celebrations I'd orchestrated over the years. Alana loved surprises, loved feeling special, and I loved making that happen for her. It wasn't about the money, though God knows I'd spent plenty. It was about seeing that look in her eyes when everything came together perfectly. "That sounds great," I told Melody. "Why don't you send it over, and I'll take a look." "Actually, I just emailed it to you about 5 minutes ago. Should be sitting in your inbox right now. I know you're probably swamped with emails, so I figured I'd call to make sure you saw it." I switched over to my email while keeping the phone pressed to my ear. Sure enough, there it was, Alana Ellison 40th birthday, final guest list for approval. The subject line was simple, professional, exactly what you'd expect from someone who clearly knew what they were doing. "Got it," I said, double-clicking to open the attachment. "Let me pull this up while we're talking." The document opened, and I started scanning through it casually. Nothing surprising at first. There was Bria, Alana's best friend from college, who could drink anyone under the table and always had the best gossip. Her cousin Theo, who told terrible jokes, but was somehow impossible not to like. Sarah and Michael from her book club. A few neighbors. Some colleagues from the nonprofit where she used to work before she went back to school. "The RSVPs have been fantastic," Melody was saying. "I think we're looking at about 60 people, which is perfect for the venue. Not too crowded, but definitely festive." Mrs. Ellison was very specific about wanting an intimate but elegant atmosphere. I kept scrolling, half listening to Melody's cheerful commentary about place settings and centerpieces. More names I recognized, friends from our gym, a couple we'd gone on vacation with last year, some of Alana's sorority sisters who still got together for girls' weekends. And then I saw them. Two names that made everything else on the list disappear. Two names that hit me like a punch to the gut, even though they were just sitting there innocuously in Times New Roman font, as if they belonged. Felix Granger. Marco Hartley. My hands went completely still on the keyboard. The coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. Everything in my office. The view of the sound, the hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of Seattle traffic 42 floors below, all of it just vanished. Felix Granger. Alana's ex-husband. The man she'd been married to for 3 years before we met. The man who'd cheated on her with her own sister and then had the nerve to ask for alimony in the divorce. I'd helped her through the aftermath of that disaster, held her while she cried, helped her rebuild her confidence piece by piece. And Marco Hartley. Jesus Christ, Marco Hartley. The man who'd nearly destroyed me before I even got started. Back when I was nobody, when the taco truck was my entire world and my entire future, Marco had been my business partner. We were going to conquer the food service industry together, Two young guys with big dreams and empty pockets. Until he decided those dreams looked better without me in them. He'd sabotaged our first real contract, stolen our suppliers, and left me holding a pile of debt that took me years to dig out from under. The betrayal had almost sent me into bankruptcy. Hell, it had almost sent me into therapy. But instead, it made me stronger, smarter, more careful about who I trusted. It taught me that success wasn't just about having good ideas. It was about protecting yourself from people who would smile to your face while picking your pocket. And I think the champagne selection is going to be a real showstopper. Melody was still talking, her voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. Mrs. Ellison specifically requested the Dom Perignon, and honestly, for a milestone birthday like this, why not go all out, right? Why not go all out indeed? Apparently, my wife had decided to go all out by inviting the two men who'd caused me the most pain in my adult life to celebrate her birthday on my dime. The men who'd betrayed me, humiliated me, and left me to pick up the pieces were going to raise champagne glasses in my venue, eat food prepared by my caterers, and probably have a good laugh about old times. My throat felt like I'd swallowed sawdust. There had to be some mistake, some error in the guest list. Maybe these were different people with the same names. Maybe. But no, I knew it was them. Felix Granger wasn't exactly a common name, and there was only one Marco Hartley who would have any reason to be on a guest list compiled by my wife. Mr. Ellison? Melody's voice cut through my thoughts. Are you still there? Did the call drop? I cleared my throat, surprised by how normal my voice sounded when I finally spoke. I'm here. I'm looking at the list now. Wonderful. Any questions or concerns? I know it's a lot of people, but the venue can definitely handle it, and I think the mix is going to create such a lovely atmosphere. Questions? Yeah, I had a few questions. Like how long had Alana been planning this little surprise? Like when exactly had she decided that my feelings were optional? Like what the hell made her think I would bankroll a reunion with the men who tried to ruin my life? But instead of asking any of those questions, I found myself saying something else entirely. Cancel the entire party. The silence on the other end of the line was so complete, I thought the call actually had dropped this time. I'm sorry, Melody finally said, her voice smaller now, confused. I don't think I heard you correctly. Cancel it. I repeated, my voice calm and steady. The whole thing. The venue, the catering, everything. But sir, she stammered. I mean, with all due respect, you're not the celebrant. This is Mrs. Ellison's birthday party, and she's been so excited. No, I interrupted, and for the first time since I'd opened that email, I felt something other than shock. I felt clarity. But I own the venue, the catering company, and the hotel chain her guests are staying in. The silence stretched between Melody and me like a taut wire, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to process what I'd just told her. I didn't blame her for being confused. Hell, if I were in her shoes, I'd probably think I was dealing with some kind of control freak husband who'd lost his damn mind over a party guest list. But that's the thing about power, real power. It's invisible until you decide to use it. And most people have no idea how deep the rabbit hole goes until they're already falling down it. I'm sorry, Mr. Ellison, Melody said finally, and I could hear her shuffling papers on the other end of the line. I think there might be some confusion here. The venue we're using is the Riverside Estate, and according to my contracts, it's owned by Cascade Properties LLC. The catering is being handled by Artisan Events, and the hotel accommodations are at the Grandview Boutique Hotel. I've been working with all these vendors for months. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the Seattle skyline, watching a ferry make its slow progress across Elliott Bay. Amazing how something so heavy could look so graceful on the water. Kind of like business deals, actually. The bigger they are, the smoother they should appear to move. Melody, I said, keeping my voice patient and level. Let me walk you through this. The Riverside Estate, that beautiful property with the gardens and the view of the mountains that your client fell in love with? It's owned by Cascade Properties LLC, which is a shell company, a subsidiary of Northwest Holdings, which is owned by Ellison Group. That's my company. I could hear her typing, probably pulling up documents or doing a quick Google search. I didn't mind waiting. Sometimes the best way to make a point is to let people discover the truth for themselves. The Artisan Events catering team, I continued, the one with the James Beard award-winning chef and the impeccable service record? I acquired that company about 8 months ago when they were facing bankruptcy. Turned out they were brilliant at creating incredible food experiences, but terrible at managing cash flow. Classic creative types. They kept the name, kept their staff, kept doing what they do best. They just happened to report to my hospitality division now. More typing. Faster now. I imagine Melody frantically cross-referencing vendor information, probably wondering how she'd missed something this significant. But she hadn't missed anything. The whole point of shell companies and subsidiary structures is that they're designed to be invisible. Most people never look past the surface, and why would they? When you're planning a party, you care about whether the flowers are fresh and the champagne is cold, not about the corporate structure behind the company that's making it happen. As for the Grandview Boutique Hotel, I went on, where I believe most of the out-of-town guests have made reservations. That's one of my more recent acquisitions. Picked it up about 6 months ago. The previous owners were an elderly couple who wanted to retire but couldn't find buyers who would maintain the property's character. I promised them I'd keep the boutique feel, the local art, even the staff. And I have. The only thing that changed was who signs the paychecks. The typing had stopped. Melody wasn't saying anything, but I could hear her breathing, so I knew she was still there, probably staring at her computer screen, watching her carefully planned event dissolve before her eyes. I understand this is a lot to process, I said, and I genuinely felt bad for her. None of this was Melody's fault. She was just doing her job, trying to create a beautiful experience for a client. She had no way of knowing that the client's husband owned half the vendors in the city, or that said husband was about to pull the rug out from under the whole operation. But Mr. Ellison, she said, and her voice had gotten smaller, more uncertain. This is your wife's 40th birthday party. I mean, surely you don't want to disappoint her over what? A guest list disagreement. A guest list disagreement. That's what she thought this was. Some petty marital spat about +1s or seating arrangements. If only it were that simple. Melody, let me ask you something, I said. If someone invited your worst enemy to your birthday party, someone who had tried to destroy your career, someone who had betrayed your trust in the most personal way possible, and then expected you to not only tolerate their presence, but actually pay for the privilege of hosting them, how would you feel? I don't understand. Are you saying there are people on the guest list who? I'm saying my wife invited 2 men who cost me years of my life and nearly destroyed my business before it even got started. Men who betrayed me, humiliated me, and left me to pick up the pieces. And she didn't just invite them. She expected me to fund their entertainment. I could hear Melody breathing heavily now, probably realizing that she'd stumbled into the middle of something much bigger and messier than a simple party planning gig. The thing is, I continued, Alana doesn't know about my ownership stakes in these companies. She never asked, and I never volunteered the information. She just saw what looked like the best vendors in the city and assumed they were independent contractors. She did her research, found companies with great reputations and stellar reviews, and hired them based on merit. Which, honestly, makes me proud of the businesses I've built. So she has no idea that you could actually cancel everything? None whatsoever. To her, I'm just her husband who happens to be successful enough to afford a nice party. She thinks the power in this situation belongs to the vendors, the venues, the service providers. She has no idea that the power belongs to me. Melody was quiet for a long moment, and I could practically hear her mind racing, trying to figure out how to salvage this situation. Mr. Ellison, she said finally, what if we could modify the guest list? Remove the people who are causing the problem? Would that be acceptable? I looked at the email again, at those 2 names that had started this whole 2 ghosts from my past that my wife had apparently decided to resurrect without bothering to ask how I felt about it. Melody, I said, the problem isn't just the guest list. The problem is that my wife thought it was okay to invite these people in the first place. The problem is that she made this decision without considering how it would affect me. And the problem is that she expected me to smile and write the checks while she entertained the men who tried to ruin my life. So what happens now? I looked out at the Seattle skyline again, at the city I'd conquered one deal at a time, one acquisition at a time. A city where I owned more than most people realized, where my influence extended further than anyone suspected. Now, I said, we find out what it really costs to disrespect someone who built your world. I was still on the phone with Melody, watching her mental gears grinding as she tried to figure out how to navigate this corporate minefield, when my phone buzzed with a text notification. The sound was innocuous enough, just that little ping that usually meant someone was asking what I wanted for lunch or reminding me about a dentist appointment. But something about the timing made my stomach clench. "Hold on just a second, Melody," I said, putting the call on speaker so I could check my phone. "I need to look at something." The text was from Alana. Of course it was. Because apparently, the universe has this twisted sense of timing that would make a Hollywood screenwriter jealous. There's her name on my screen, accompanied by that little photo I'd taken of her last summer when we were in Napa. She's laughing in the picture, wine glass in hand, completely relaxed and happy. It's one of my favorite photos of her, which is probably why seeing it right now felt like getting punched in the throat. I opened the message, and the words hit me like ice water. "Hey babe, the guest list is final. Don't overthink it. Be classy and stay calm. I want no drama at my birthday." I read it once, then twice, then a third time, because surely I was missing something. Some context, some tone, some indication that she understood the magnitude of what she'd done. But no, there it was, in all its dismissive glory. Don't overthink it. Be classy. Stay calm. No drama. The thing about text messages is that they strip away all the nuance of human communication. No facial expressions, no tone of voice, no body language to soften the blow or add context. Just words on a screen, stark and unforgiving. And sometimes, that clarity is exactly what you need to see the truth. My wife. The woman I'd supported through medical school, the woman whose student loans I'd paid off without being asked, the woman I'd held through panic attacks and celebrated with through triumphs, had just patted me on the head like a dog who might bark at the mailman. "Don't overthink it, babe. Just be a good boy and write the checks." "Mr. Ellison?" Melody's voice sounded tinny coming through the speakerphone. "Are you still there?" "I'm here," I said, but my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Distant, like it was coming from somewhere outside my body. I stared at that text message and felt something shift inside my chest. Not the explosive rage you see in movies, with people throwing things and screaming. This was different. This was cold, calculated. The kind of anger that doesn't make noise because it's too busy planning. Be classy and stay calm. That's what she wanted from me. Class. Composure. The ability to smile and make small talk with Felix Granger, the man who'd broken her heart and then tried to take half her assets in the divorce. The grace to shake hands with Marco Hartley, the man who'd nearly destroyed my business when I was too young and trusting to protect myself. She wanted me to be classy while she served up my humiliation on a silver platter, garnished with champagne and a string quartet. The worst part wasn't even the guest list itself. It was the assumption behind it. The casual entitlement that said my feelings were negotiable, my pain was something to be managed rather than respected. She'd made this decision, this monumentally disrespectful decision, and then had the nerve to tell me not to make it into drama. But here's what Alana didn't understand about drama. It's not something you create. It's something you reveal. The drama was already there, baked into her choice to invite these men. I was just deciding whether to participate in the charade or call it what it was. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my pride for the sake of peace. All the occasions when I'd bitten my tongue, chosen the path of least resistance, been the accommodating husband who didn't make waves. The dinner parties where I'd smiled at people I couldn't stand. The charity events where I'd written checks to causes I didn't believe in because it made Alana happy. The family gatherings where I'd nodded along with conversations that bored me to tears. I'd been classy. I'd stayed calm. I'd avoided drama. And what had it gotten me? A wife who thought my boundaries were suggestions and my feelings were inconveniences. "Melody," I said, picking up the phone again. "Are you familiar with the concept of leverage?" "I'm sorry, leverage. It's when you have something someone else needs, and you use that position to get what you want. It's the foundation of every successful negotiation." I could hear her shifting uncomfortably. "Mr. Ellison, I'm not sure I follow. My wife thinks she's negotiating from a position of strength." I continued, still staring at that text message. "She thinks she holds all the cards because it's her birthday, her party, her guest list. She thinks I'll go along with whatever she wants because that's what I've always done before. And you won't. Let me tell you what leverage actually looks like, Melody. Leverage is owning the venue where the party's supposed to happen. Leverage is controlling the catering company that was going to provide the food. Leverage is having the power to cancel hotel reservations with a single phone call. That's not being dramatic. That's just being realistic about who actually has the power in this situation. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city 42 floors below. All those people going about their lives, completely unaware that a small domestic drama was playing out in a corporate office above their heads. The thing about being up this high is that it gives you perspective. Everything looks smaller, more manageable, when you're looking down at it from a position of power. My wife wants no drama, I said, more to myself than to Melody. She wants me to be classy and stay calm while she humiliates me in front of 60 people. She wants me to smile and make toast to her health while she celebrates with the men who tried to destroy mine. What are you going to do? I looked at my reflection in the window glass, superimposed over the Seattle skyline like some kind of corporate ghost. 42 floors up, looking down at a world that didn't know what was coming. I'm going to give her exactly what she asked for, I said. No drama, just consequences. The beauty of real power is that it doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to raise its voice or make threats. It just acts, quietly, efficiently, with the kind of cold precision that changes everything without ever looking like it's trying to change anything at all. Alana wanted classy. She was about to learn what classy really looked like when it decided to stop playing nice. The first call came exactly 23 minutes after I hung up with Melody. I know because I was watching the clock on my computer screen, wondering how long it would take for the news to spread. 23 minutes. That's how long it took for the carefully constructed facade of Alana's perfect birthday party to start crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. It was Bria. Bria Martinez had been Alana's best friend since their freshman year at University of Washington, and in all the years I'd known her, I'd never heard her sound anything less than completely confident. Bria was the kind of woman who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 3 new business contacts and 2 dinner invitations. She was loud, funny, fiercely loyal, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting the people she cared about. Which is why hearing her voice crack with panic was so damn satisfying. Rowan, she said without any preamble, what the hell is going on? I just got a call from some party planners saying the venue is canceled. Please tell me this is some kind of miscommunication. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence stretch for a few seconds, the way I do in business negotiations when I want the other person to start talking first. Silence makes people nervous, and nervous people reveal more than they intend to. No miscommunication, I said finally, keeping my voice neutral. The party's canceled. But why? Alana's been planning this for months. Do you have any idea how excited she is? How much this means to her? That's the thing about Alana's friends. They genuinely care about her. They're not just fair-weather companions or social climbers looking for networking opportunities. They actually want her to be happy, which would normally make me like them more. But right now, their loyalty to her felt like an accusation. I'm sure she is excited, I said. Unfortunately, she made some interesting choices about the guest list. The guest list? Rowan, what are you talking about? Of course Bria didn't know. Why would she? Alana probably hadn't bothered to mention that she'd invited Felix and Marco to the party. Why would she? It's not like their presence would affect anyone else's good time. It was just her husband who would have to grin and bear it while his wife's ex-husband and his former business partner made themselves comfortable in venues he owned. Ask your friend, I told Bria. I'm sure she'll explain everything. The line went quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear Bria's brain working, trying to piece together what could have gone so wrong that I would cancel my own wife's birthday party. Rowan, she said, and her voice had shifted into that careful tone people use when they think they're dealing with someone who might be having a breakdown. I know you and Alana have your issues, but this seems pretty extreme. Can't you guys work this out after the party? Don't ruin her birthday over some marriage counseling bullshit. Marriage counseling bullshit. That's what she thought this was. Some petty domestic dispute that I was blowing out of proportion because I couldn't handle my emotions like a grown man. The assumption stung, but it also clarified something for me. Everyone was going to assume I was being unreasonable. Everyone was going to take Alana's side because they didn't know the whole story. The party's canceled, Bria, I repeated. That's final. She hung up without saying goodbye. The second call came 15 minutes later. Theo, Alana's cousin. Theo was a good guy, worked as a high school guidance counselor, coached Little League on weekends, the kind of person who remembered your birthday and actually meant it when he asked how you were doing. Under normal circumstances, I genuinely enjoyed talking to him. These weren't normal circumstances. Hey Rowan, man, I just heard about some confusion with the party venue. Bria called my mom in a panic, and now everyone's freaking out. What's the deal? Theo's approach was different from Bria's. Less accusatory, more genuinely concerned. He wasn't trying to steamroll me or guilt me into changing my mind. He just wanted to understand what was happening, which somehow made it worse. It's not confusion, Theo, I said. The party's been canceled. But why? I mean, Alana's been looking forward to this for months. She's been texting everyone about it, sending Pinterest boards of decorations, the whole 9 yards. What could have happened to make you want to cancel it? What could have happened? As if there was some external force at work here, some act of God or unavoidable catastrophe that had forced my hand. As if I was just reacting to circumstances beyond my control instead of making a deliberate choice to protect my own dignity. Ask Alana, I told him. I'm sure she'll have a version of events that makes perfect sense to her. Rowan, come on. Talk to me. What's really going on here? The thing about Theo is that he's genuinely a good listener. It's probably what makes him good at his job, dealing with teenagers who are convinced no one understands them. He has this way of asking questions that makes you want to open up, to explain yourself, to believe that someone might actually take your side. For a split second, I considered telling him everything. About Felix and Marco, about the years of humiliation and betrayal, about the casual way Alana had dismissed my feelings with a text message that basically told me to shut up and smile. But then I realized that explaining would make me look weak. It would make this whole thing seem like it was about my fragile ego instead of about respect and boundaries. The party's canceled, I said instead. That's all you need to know. By the time I hung up, my assistant Patricia was buzzing me again. Mr. Ellison, you've got about 6 more calls holding. They all say it's urgent, something about Mrs. Ellison's party. The dominoes were falling faster now. Word was spreading through Alana's social circle like wildfire, and each person who called was more frantic than the last. Her mother, Sylvia, called and left a voicemail that started with Rowan, honey, and ended with please call me back immediately. We need to talk about this. Her father, Gordon, sent a text that was just 3 words. Call me now. But the call that really caught my attention came from someone I hadn't expected to hear from. Felix. Felix fucking Granger had the unmitigated gall to text me directly. Not call, text. Like we were old buddies who kept in touch regularly instead of 2 men who had every reason to avoid each other for the rest of our natural lives. I guess you finally found out. No hard feelings. Just be mature. Just be mature. There it was again, that casual assumption that my reaction was childish, that my boundaries were negotiable, that my feelings were something to be managed rather than respected. Felix, the man who had cheated on my wife, who had put her through hell, who had no business being anywhere near our lives, was telling me to be mature. I stared at that message for a long time, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my chest. Then I blocked his number without responding. Some conversations aren't worth having, and some people aren't worth the energy it takes to tell them to go to hell. Marco, predictably, didn't reach out at all. He never had the spine for direct confrontation, which is probably why he'd chosen sabotage over honest competition all those years ago. But his silence spoke volumes. He knew exactly why he wasn't welcome, and he was smart enough not to poke the bear. But Alana? Alana called. Twice. Both calls went straight to voicemail, because I wasn't ready to have that conversation yet. Then came the texts. Rowan, what did you do? You're embarrassing me. Not I'm sorry. Not can we talk about this? Not I didn't realize how this would affect you. Just accusation and indignation, as if I was the one who had crossed a line, as if I was the one who should be embarrassed. My phone had been ringing nonstop for the better part of 2 hours, and I'd stopped answering after the 15th call from someone demanding to know what was wrong with me. Let them panic. Let them scramble. Let them finally understand that actions have consequences, even when you're used to getting your way. I was reviewing quarterly projections from my Portland hotel when Patricia buzzed me again. This time, her voice carried a note of genuine concern that cut through her usual professional composure. Mr. Ellison, I have Melody on line 3 again. She says it's urgent, and honestly, sir, she sounds pretty desperate. I glanced at the clock. 4:30 in the afternoon. The party was supposed to be this Saturday, Exactly 9 days away. In the event planning world, 9 days might as well be 9 minutes. Every vendor, every detail, every moving piece of a 60-person celebration had been meticulously coordinated, and I'd just blown it all to hell with a single phone call. Put her through, I said, curious to see how this was going to play out. Melody's voice was strained when she came on the line, like someone who'd been making frantic phone calls for hours and was running out of options. Which, knowing what I knew about the vendor landscape in Seattle, was probably exactly the case. Mr. Ellison, thank you for taking my call. I've been working the phones all afternoon, and I have to be honest with you. We're in serious trouble here. How so? There's nowhere else available. I've called every venue within a 50-mile radius that could handle a party this size, and they're all booked solid. The Fairmont, the Four Seasons, the historic ballrooms downtown, everything's taken. And that's just the venues. The catering situation is even worse. I leaned back in my chair, unsurprised but mildly interested in hearing the full scope of the disaster. When you control as much of the hospitality market as I do, sudden cancellations tend to create ripple effects that are hard to contain. What about the catering? I asked. Every decent caterer in the city is either already booked for that weekend or they're part of your network. The independent operations that are available, well, let's just say they're not exactly up to the standards Mrs. Ellison was expecting. We're talking about people who usually handle office lunch meetings and high school graduations. There was a pause, and I could hear papers shuffling on her end. Probably a list of increasingly desperate alternatives that she knew wouldn't work. And the hotels? That's the worst part. All the decent accommodations are either full or they're properties you own. I've got people calling me asking if they should book rooms in Tacoma or drive up from Portland, but honestly, Mr. Ellison, this is turning into a nightmare. Mrs. Ellison's guests are confused, her family is upset, and I'm starting to look like the most incompetent party planner in the Pacific Northwest. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Melody was collateral damage in a war she hadn't signed up for, a professional doing her job who'd gotten caught in the crossfire of my marriage. But feeling bad for her didn't change the fundamental equation. My wife had disrespected me, and now everyone was learning what that actually cost. I understand your position, Melody, I said, and I meant it. But I'm not running a charity here. If Mrs. Ellison wants to have her party, she's going to have to meet my terms. What terms? This was the moment I'd been building toward all afternoon. The point where I stopped being the accommodating husband who swallowed his pride and started being the businessman who understood leverage. I'll give you one venue, I said slowly, making sure she understood that this was a negotiation, not a capitulation. The Riverside estate can be available, but only for a smaller event. 30 guests maximum, not 60. One menu option, not the elaborate multi-course affair your client was planning. 30. That's her problem to solve, not mine. But if she wants to use my venue, those are the parameters. I could hear Melody breathing heavily, probably calculating whether this compromise was better than complete disaster. For a party planner, having to tell a client that their guest list needed to be cut in half was professional humiliation. But having to tell them there was no party at all was career suicide. Is that your only condition? No. I let that word hang in the air for a moment, giving it weight. There are two other requirements that are non-negotiable. What are they? First, I want a public apology from Mrs. Ellison during the toast. She will stand up in front of whatever guests remain and acknowledge that she disrespected me and my feelings. She will admit that she made decisions about this event without considering their impact on our marriage. The silence on Melody's end was so complete, I thought the call had dropped. Mr. Ellison, she said finally, I'm not sure I can ask a client to apologize at her own birthday party. That's incredibly personal. Everything about this situation is personal, Melody. My wife made it personal when she decided my boundaries were optional. If she wants me to fund her celebration, she can publicly acknowledge what she did wrong. And the second condition? Payment of $100,000. Cash. Upfront. Before any contracts are signed or any arrangements are confirmed. This time the silence stretched so long I started counting. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. $100,000? Melody's voice had gone up about an octave. But Mr. Ellison, the original budget for this party was only $25,000. You're asking for 4 times that amount. I'm not asking for anything, I corrected. I'm stating the price of doing business with someone who tried to humiliate me. 25,000 was the cost when I thought I was planning a birthday party for my wife. 100,000 is the cost of rebuilding something after your client tried to destroy it. I could hear her scribbling notes, probably trying to figure out how to present this ultimatum to Alana in a way that didn't make her sound like a complete failure as a party planner. Melody, I said, softening my tone slightly. I know this isn't what you signed up for. You're caught in the middle of something that has nothing to do with your professional competence. But these are my terms. Half the guest list, a public apology, and $100,000. If Mrs. Ellison agrees to all three, she can have her party. And if she doesn't? I looked out at the Seattle skyline, at the city where I'd built an empire one deal at a time, one acquisition at a time. A city where my influence extended further than most people realized, where my power was measured not in what I said, but in what I controlled. Then she can explain to 60 disappointed guests why her 40th birthday celebration turned into a lesson about the cost of disrespect. There was another long pause, and when Melody spoke again, her voice was small and defeated. I'll present your terms to Mrs. Ellison. You do that, I said. And Melody, you might want to suggest she move quickly. I have other ways to spend my money, and my patience isn't unlimited. After I hung up, I sat in my office watching the afternoon light fade over Elliott Bay. In a few hours, Melody would be having the most uncomfortable conversation of her professional career. Shortly after that, Alana would be learning that actions have consequences, even when you're used to getting your way. Especially then. She came to my office at 6:15 that evening, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously she was taking this situation. Alana never showed up anywhere without calling first, never dropped by my workplace unannounced, and definitely never came to see me when she was angry without having carefully rehearsed exactly what she was going to say. But here she was, 45 minutes after my assistant had officially gone home for the day, striding through my office door like she owned the place. She looked absolutely stunning, which was both typical and infuriating. Alana had this gift for looking effortlessly put together even when her world was falling apart. She was wearing a charcoal gray dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, designer heels that added 3 inches to her height, and a pearl necklace I'd given her for our 3rd anniversary. Her dark hair was pulled back in that sleek chignon she favored for important meetings, and her makeup was flawless despite the fact that she'd probably been crying for the last 2 hours. "You bastard," she said without preamble, slamming my office door hard enough to rattle the framed photos on my bookshelf. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been pretending to review some contracts while actually watching the elevator bank through my glass office walls, waiting for her to arrive. I'd known she would come. The only question had been how long it would take her to work up the courage. "I canceled a party," I said mildly, leaning back in my chair. "I'm pretty sure that's not a capital offense in Washington state." "Don't." Her voice was sharp, cutting. "Don't you dare act like this is some casual business decision. You humiliated me, Rowan. You humiliated me in front of my friends, my family, everyone who matters to me." She moved closer to my desk, and I could see the fury radiating off her like heat. Alana angry was something to behold. All controlled elegance with fire underneath, like a perfectly maintained facade hiding a raging inferno. Under different circumstances, I might have found it attractive. Right now, it just pissed me off. "I humiliated you?" I asked, closing my laptop and giving her my full attention. "That's interesting, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you humiliated yourself when you decided to invite Felix and Marco to a party I was funding." She had the grace to flinch at that, which told me she'd been hoping I wouldn't mention them directly. Maybe she'd been planning to gaslight me, to make this whole thing about my overreaction rather than her spectacular breach of trust. "They're just names on a list, Rowan. Just people I used to know. You're acting like I invited them to move in with us. Just people you used to know." I stood up, moving around my desk so there was nothing between us. "Felix isn't just someone you used to know, Alana. He's your ex-husband. The man who cheated on you with your sister. The man who tried to take half your assets in the divorce. The man I held you while you cried over for months. That was years ago. And Marco isn't just someone I used to know either. He's the man who sabotaged my first business, who stole my suppliers, who nearly bankrupted me before I was smart enough to protect myself. The man who cost me 2 years of my life and almost destroyed my career before it started. She crossed her arms, a defensive gesture that told me she knew she was on shaky ground, but wasn't ready to concede anything. You're being vindictive, she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. This is about revenge, not about the party. No, this is about respect. Something you apparently forgot I deserve. That's when her parents arrived. I heard them before I saw them. Gordon's voice in the outer office, talking to building security, explaining that they needed to see me immediately. Then Sylvia's higher-pitched tones, probably apologizing to whoever was unlucky enough to be working late on the 42nd floor. Alana's shoulders sagged when she heard them, and for the first time since she'd walked into my office, she looked less like an avenging angel and more like a woman who was in over her head. You called your parents? I asked. They called me, she said quietly. After Bria called them. After Theo called them. After everyone in my family started asking why my birthday party had been canceled, and I had to explain that my husband had lost his mind. The knock on my office door was polite but insistent. I walked over and opened it to find Gordon and Sylvia Blackwood standing in the hallway, both of them looking like they'd aged about 5 years in the last few hours. Gordon was a distinguished man in his early 70s, the kind of guy who'd built a successful law practice through careful networking and impeccable reputation management. He was used to solving problems through negotiation and compromise, used to finding middle ground that everyone could live with. Sylvia was more direct, a former high school principal who'd spent 30 years dealing with teenagers and their drama. Between the two of them, they'd probably handled their share of family crises, but they'd never dealt with anything quite like this. Rowan, Gordon said, extending his hand like we were meeting for the first time. Thank you for seeing us. I know it's late. Gordon, Sylvia. I shook his hand and nodded to her. Come in. Though I should warn you, your daughter and I were in the middle of what you might call a frank discussion. Sylvia's eyes went immediately to Alana, taking in the rigid posture and carefully controlled expression. Sweetheart, are you all right? I'm fine, Mom, Alana said, but her voice was strained. Rowan was just explaining why he thinks destroying my birthday party was a reasonable response to a guest list he didn't approve of. That's not what happened, I said calmly. And you know it. Gordon cleared his throat, the way he probably did in tense client meetings when he needed to redirect the conversation. Rowan, I'm sure there's been some kind of misunderstanding here. Surely we can work something out that makes everyone happy. Actually, I said, moving back behind my desk and sitting down, I've already proposed a solution. Your daughter just doesn't like the terms. What terms? Sylvia asked, looking between Alana and me like she was trying to referee a tennis match. I looked at Alana, giving her the opportunity to explain. When she didn't speak, I did it for her. 30 guests instead of 60. A public apology during the toast. And payment of $100,000. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming. $100,000? Gordon's voice was carefully neutral, but I could see him calculating, probably trying to figure out if this was some kind of negotiating tactic. That's 4 times what the original party was supposed to cost, Sylvia added, her principal instincts kicking in. She probably dealt with plenty of unreasonable demands from angry parents over the years. The original party was planned in good faith, I said. This party is being planned to repair the damage your daughter did to our marriage. Different circumstances, different price. Gordon pulled out his checkbook. I watched him write out the check with the kind of grim determination you see from people who've decided that money is the easiest way to solve a problem. His handwriting was careful, precise, the penmanship of someone who'd signed a lot of important documents over the years. When he handed it to me, I looked at the amount. $100,000, written out in his careful script. There, he said. Now can we please put this behind us and move forward like adults? I folded the check and put it in my shirt pocket. That takes care of the money. But there are still 2 other conditions. Alana finally spoke up. I'm not apologizing at my own birthday party, Rowan. That's humiliating. More humiliating than inviting my enemies to celebrate on my dime. She looked at her parents, probably hoping they would support her position. But Gordon and Sylvia had the look of people who were beginning to understand that their daughter might have been more in the wrong than they'd initially realized. Alana, Sylvia said gently, maybe an apology isn't such a bad idea. If you hurt Rowan's feelings. I didn't mean to hurt anyone's feelings. I just wanted to have a nice party. By inviting Felix Granger, I said quietly, and Marco Hartley. The recognition dawned on both her parents' faces simultaneously. They knew these names. They knew what these men had done to their daughter and, by extension, to me. "Oh, sweetheart," Sylvia whispered. "You didn't." Alana's face crumpled, and for the first time since this whole mess started, she looked like she might actually understand what she'd done. But understanding and accepting responsibility are two different things. "You've changed," she said, looking at me with something that might have been disappointment. "You used to be understanding. You used to be forgiving." I looked at her for a long moment, taking in the woman I'd married, the woman I'd supported through medical school, the woman whose debt I'd paid and whose dreams I'd funded, the woman who'd just discovered that forgiveness has limits. "No," I said quietly. "I just stopped pretending to be small." The check cleared on Friday morning. $100,000, drawn from Gordon and Sylvia's joint account, because apparently my in-laws had decided this was a problem that money could solve. They weren't wrong, exactly, but they weren't right either. The money wasn't the point. It was just the price of admission to a lesson about consequences. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp October air that makes Seattle feel like a postcard. The Riverside estate looked exactly as beautiful as it always did, with the gardens bathed in golden hour light and the mountains providing their usual dramatic backdrop. Melody had outdone herself with the reduced setup, elegant, intimate, controlled. 30 carefully selected guests instead of 60 desperate ones. I arrived fashionably late, because punctuality would have suggested I was eager for this performance. Alana was already there, of course, holding court near the champagne fountain in a stunning burgundy dress that I'd never seen before. She looked radiant and nervous, like an actress on opening night who wasn't entirely sure she remembered all her lines. The guest list had been brutal to compile, I was sure. How do you choose which 30 people out of 60 deserve to witness your public humiliation? How do you explain to lifelong friends that they didn't make the cut for your own birthday party? Melody had probably earned every penny of her fee just managing those conversations. Felix Granger wasn't there. Neither was Marco Hartley. That absence hung over the party like expensive perfume, noticeable to anyone who knew to look for it, invisible to everyone else. The people who remained kept glancing around with the kind of confused expressions that suggested they'd expected a bigger crowd. Conversations carried that slightly forced quality of gatherings where everyone knows something's wrong, but nobody wants to be the first to ask what. Bria was there, of course, shooting me looks that could have cut glass. Theo tried to make small talk about the weather, his usual warmth tempered by obvious discomfort. Gordon and Sylvia moved through the crowd like professional hosts, smiling and chatting and pretending this was exactly the party they'd always envisioned for their daughter's 40th birthday. The dinner was flawless. Artisan Events had prepared a single menu. Nothing elaborate, nothing custom, just their standard high-end offering. The conversation flowed like expensive wine, punctuated by the kind of laughter that's just a little too loud, a little too bright. Everyone was trying so hard to act normal that the whole thing felt like dinner theater. And then came the toast. Alana stood slowly, champagne flute trembling slightly in her hand. The conversations died away one by one until the only sound was the distant hum of Seattle traffic and the soft rustle of October leaves. 30 pairs of eyes focused on her, waiting for the usual birthday speech about gratitude and friendship and looking forward to another year. Instead, she looked directly at me. "I want to publicly apologize to my husband, Rowan," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the terrace. "I disrespected his trust, his support, and his generosity. I tried to control something that wasn't mine to manipulate." The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a champagne bubble pop. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared into their glasses like they discovered something fascinating in the bubbles. A few brave souls managed awkward smiles and raised their glasses in a toast that felt more like a wake. But I watched her, and for the first time in years, I saw my wife not as the woman I'd fallen in love with, but as someone I couldn't trust. Someone who could make decisions that cut me to the bone and then act surprised when I bled. Someone who thought apologies could erase disrespect, that consequences were always negotiable. The party continued for another 2 hours. People made polite conversation and complimented the food and took careful selfies that somehow avoided capturing the underlying tension. By 10 o'clock, the last guest had departed with relief barely concealed behind their thank you hugs. Alana and I rode home in silence that felt heavier than words. The next morning arrived with the kind of gray Seattle drizzle that makes you want to stay in bed and pretend the world doesn't exist. I was already dressed and packing a weekend bag when Alana finally emerged from the bedroom, her hair tousled and her eyes puffy from what I assumed had been a restless night. She found me in the walk-in closet, methodically folding clothes into my leather overnight bag. The same bag I'd carried on business trips for years, the one she'd given me for our 3rd anniversary back, when we still believed in forever. "What are you doing?" she asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. "Packing," I said without looking up from the stack of polo shirts I was considering. "I need some space to think." "Space to think about what?" "The party's over, Rowan. You got your apology. You made your point. Can't we just move past this now?" I paused, a navy blue sweater halfway into the bag, and finally looked at her. She was wearing one of my old Stanford t-shirts and a pair of pajama pants, looking vulnerable and young in a way that reminded me of the woman I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. But that vulnerability felt calculated now, like another performance designed to get what she wanted. "Move past it," I repeated slowly. "Just like that. People have fights, Rowan. Married couples disagree about things. It doesn't have to mean the end of the world." The end of the world. Was that what she thought this was? Some dramatic overreaction to a simple disagreement? Did she really believe that everything could go back to normal just because she'd said the words I demanded in front of 30 witnesses? "Alana," I said, zipping the bag closed. "This wasn't a fight about leaving dishes in the sink or forgetting to pay a bill. This was you making a choice that fundamentally disrespected our marriage, and then telling me to shut up and smile about it. I never told you to shut up. Be classy and stay calm. I want no drama at my birthday." I quoted her text message word for word, watching her face as the reality of what she'd written sank in. "That's not asking for my understanding." She moved closer, her hand reaching out like she was going to touch my arm, then thinking better of it. "I made a mistake, okay? I admit that. But you're overreacting. You always do this. You take one thing and blow it completely out of proportion. You always do this." There it was, the casual rewriting of history that made my reactions the problem instead of her actions. The suggestion that I was inherently unreasonable, that my boundaries were character flaws instead of self-respect. "I'm going to the beach house," I said, shouldering the bag. "I need time to figure out what comes next." "What comes next?" Her voice climbed higher, panic creeping in around the edges. "Rowan, you're scaring me." "What does that mean?" I walked past her toward the bedroom door, then stopped and turned back. She looked small standing there in our walk-in closet, surrounded by the expensive clothes and designer shoes that represented the life I'd built for us, the life she'd taken for granted. "It means I need to decide whether I want to stay married to someone who thinks my pain is drama," I said quietly. "It means I need to figure out if this is fixable or if we're just going to keep having this same conversation for the next 20 years. "You're leaving me," she whispered, and for the first time since this whole thing started, she looked genuinely afraid. "I'm leaving the situation," I corrected. "There's a difference." But even as I said it, I wasn't entirely sure that was true. The beach house was 2 hours away, far enough from Seattle to provide the kind of clarity that only comes with distance. Far enough to think without her voice in my ear, telling me I was overreacting, that bygones should be bygones, that love meant accepting whatever scraps of respect she was willing to offer. As I walked out of our bedroom, I could hear her calling my name, but I didn't turn around. Some conversations aren't worth having twice, and some people need to learn that consequences aren't always negotiable. The party was over. For good. 3 weeks at the beach house had given me something I hadn't realized I'd been missing: silence. Not just the absence of noise, but the absence of expectation. No one asking me to be understanding, to compromise, to pretend that respect was optional in a marriage. The charity gala was one of those Seattle events where everyone who mattered showed up to write checks and feel good about themselves. The Children's Hospital Foundation hosted at my newest acquisition, the Metropolitan Hotel downtown. Ironic, really. Even when I was trying to get space from my marriage, I couldn't escape my own success. I debated not going, but absence would have been noticed. Questions asked. Speculation started. Better to show up, make the expected donation, and remind everyone that Rowan Ellison was doing just fine. The ballroom was elegant in that understated way that screamed expensive: crystal chandeliers, white linens, centerpieces that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. I moved through the crowd easily, shaking hands, making small talk about quarterly returns and market projections. Business was good. Business was always good when you controlled as much of the hospitality market as I did. And then I saw her. Alana stood across the ballroom near the silent auction tables, stunning in a black evening gown I'd never seen before. She was talking to the mayor's wife, smiling and laughing like nothing had changed, like her world hadn't shifted on its axis 3 weeks ago. But I could see the difference. The way her eyes kept scanning the room. The careful positioning that gave her a clear view of the entrance. She was looking for me. Our eyes met across the crowd, and everything else faded into background noise. The conversations, the clinking glasses, the string quartet playing something forgettable in the corner, all of it disappeared. For just a moment, we were the only two people in the room. She looked at me with something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not defiance, not that casual dismissal I'd grown so tired of. This was different. This was longing, regret, the kind of raw emotion that can't be manufactured or performed. She took a half step in my direction, then stopped, waiting for some signal from me, some indication that the distance between us could be crossed, that forgiveness was possible, that we could find our way back to each other. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had been my world for 8 years. The woman whose dreams I'd funded, whose debts I'd cleared, whose happiness I'd prioritized over my own peace. The woman who thought my boundaries were suggestions and my feelings were drama. Then I turned and walked away. Later that night, alone in my downtown penthouse, I sent her one final text. The party's over. For good. She didn't reply, and that silence was louder than any apology she could have offered. From that day on, I wasn't just the man behind the money. I was the man behind my own peace. The man who no longer tolerated being tolerated. Because real power doesn't shout. It cancels the whole party and walks away without ever raising its voice.